believe the Torah, which makes no sense. Why would Jews want to kill that man? Well, Manu has chimed in because Christians say the Jews wanted to kill Jesus because he was claiming to be divine. That's what upset them. Manu offered what is probably the best response a Muslim could give, namely that in the Gospel of John, in chapter 11, there's a meeting of the Jewish leaders, and they say, look, Jesus is performing so many miracles. He's performing so many miracles that everyone's going to end up following him because of those miracles, and the Romans are going to come in here and destroy us. Now, we need to do something about this before the Romans come in and destroy us. Now, several things are worthy of note here. One, notice the same inconsistency that Sam was pointing out. Muslims will reject the Gospel of John when it confirms Jesus' deity, but then appeal to the Gospel of John whenever there's something that they can use. Second, notice the passage confirms that Jesus was living such a miraculous life. The Jewish leaders were worried that everyone was going to believe in him, so you have the most miraculous life in history. But third, think about this. If the Muslim view is correct, then Jesus is just going around telling people to believe in the Torah. Why would the Jewish leaders claim that a man is performing so many miracles that he's going to convince everyone to believe in the Torah? Would this upset the Jews? No, and it wouldn't upset the Romans either. In other words, the only cause for concern among the Jewish leaders is that Jesus is preaching a message that is going to cause such division that there is going to be a massive problem, such a big problem that the Romans are going to come in there and just say, this is so huge, this dispute is so big, these people are causing so many problems, we need to go and wipe all of these people out. Right. What was Jesus preaching that was so radical that it would lead to civil war in ancient Israel? Well, the Muslim view, Jesus preaching the Torah, is not going to cause a civil war in Israel that's going to cause destruction by the Romans. But Jesus claiming to be divine, some people believing him and worshiping him and wanting to serve him, and another group so completely adamantly against it that they will do anything to stop his message and kill him for blasphemy. That makes perfect sense. So once again, the Muslim view makes no sense at all. Right. The Christian view is confirmed by history. And by the way, just follow history a little after Jesus' death and resurrection. What do you find? You find the Jews doing everything in their power to stop and kill the early Christian believers. Now, why would they do that? Some scholars have argued, even scholars who reject much of Christianity have argued that the disciples of Jesus must have been preaching the deity of Christ, because that's the only thing that would cause such an uproar that people like the Apostle Paul, who was then known as Saul, would want to obliterate anyone who even believed in Jesus' message. In other words, suppose, think about this, Manu. Manu, you've got to think about this. Please, if you do anything, just listen to what I'm saying and ponder it very carefully tonight. If what you're saying is correct, then some people were following Jesus, and the Jewish leaders were so worried that everyone was going to believe in Jesus, there was going to be this great destruction, that the Romans would come and destroy them. They wanted this, they were so worried about this, they wanted Jesus killed. But then there was a group of people walking around who still believed in Jesus. Why would the Jews be so angry at these few followers of Jesus that they're worried about them and will do anything in their power to destroy these people? Well, if it's the Muslim view, then you've got a small group of people who believed in a person who told them to believe in the Torah and who died. What Jew is going to be offended by this? What Jew is going to say, those are people who believed in a guy who told them to believe in the Torah and the guy died. We need to slaughter these people. Makes no sense. But if these Christians are going around saying, we believe in the risen Lord who claimed to be divine and has risen from the dead and appeared to us, that would set off the first century Jews. That would send people like Saul of Tarsus into a rage, such a rage that he would try to wipe out Christianity in Damascus. In other words, once again, every single step of the way, everything we can investigate only confirms the Christian view, and the Muslim view is totally contradicted by the evidence every single step of the way.
Manu, are you still with us?
I'm listening.
Okay,
yes, I'm listening.
Go ahead, Manu, and then we're going to go to Brother Sam.
The comment I had was that the Quran and also the Gospels, they also say that some of the other reasons that they were so hateful of Jesus was that they thought that he broke the law. Jesus was trying to fine-tune their understanding of what the law was, which was in the two commandments that Jesus told them, that it was love God and love your neighbors as yourself. And all the other commandments fall into those. So when he performed miracles on the Sabbath, they perceived that he broke the Sabbath. He told them, no, which one of you would not do the same or likewise for their own troubled animal?
Okay, Manu, we grant you that they were upset with him when he broke the Sabbath. We grant you that what you said about, he's going to cause an uproar. You have to take that in the context of what Brother David said. And I want to go to Brother Sam before we come to your final comments. But just think about this, Manu. Not only did many different times they pick up stones immediately to kill him for the very sin of blasphemy, but remember this, Manu. In the New Testament, Jesus was brought before the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin were masters of the law. They were the head of the law of Banu Israel, of Israel. And they brought him before the court, and they tried him, and they found him guilty of death. And what did they try him on and find him guilty of death on and say that he should be killed? On what charge?
On blasphemy.
Thank you very much. And that is why he was killed. Thank you, Manu. Brother Sam, do you have anything you want to share? Chime in before we give Manu one last comment, and then we go to our next caller. Brother Sam, are you with us?
Pastor Joe, it's not one last comment. I got to address some of the points he brought up.
Okay, I understand. We've been with Manu a long time, so share, Brother Sam, as you will, but do be mindful of the time, brother.
What I want to do, I don't want to overwhelm or bombard Manu, and I don't want him to think we're ganging up on him because David had a lot to say, which was beneficial. You did and I did. But, however, what I wanted to do was go to the very books, the same passages he quoted, to demonstrate that the very same passages he quoted proves the Christian position. Now, David kept saying about John 11 that the Jews wanted to kill Jesus because he was going to lead so many to follow him and he's going to wreak havoc in Jerusalem. And he goes on to say that the disciples claimed he's the risen Lord and Savior. Exactly. What I want to do is I want to go through all the passages Manu mentioned to demonstrate, had he read those passages in context, they actually prove the Christian position, not the Islamic one. For example, let me take the last passage he mentioned, Matthew 28, verse 17. There's two things I want to say. First of all, he's assuming that resurrection appearance of Jesus to the disciples is the same resurrection appearance of Jesus mentioned in Luke 24. However, that's not the case, because in Matthew 28, we are not told that Jesus ascended right after that meeting.
Right.
Keep reading. It simply says that Jesus told them, surely I will be with you always to the very end of the age, and the gospel ends.
Yes.
It is assuming that it's the same event of Luke 24.
Right.
Moreover, Luke 24 in itself is a summary discussion. In other words, Luke is summarizing his report. By that I mean, if you read Luke 24, you'll get the impression that Luke believes that Jesus ascended to heaven that first resurrection Sunday after he appeared to the disciples, because he appears to the disciples, he confirms to them that he has a flesh and bone body, he eats what's offered to him, and then he ascends. We know that Luke is summarizing here what is known as telescoping. He's not giving us all the details, he's cutting it short, because in the very next book, which he himself wrote, he mentions that Jesus remained on earth for 40 days.
Yes.
Well, if he remained on earth for 40 days, how do you have Luke 24 speaking of Jesus ascending on that first resurrection Sunday? Well, that's not Luke's point. Luke is summarizing his report because he's going to give more details in the next book. So that in itself tells you that event that Luke is describing when he ascends to heaven is not necessarily the same on the first resurrection Sunday, and it's not necessarily the same event that Matthew mentioned. So Manu here is confusing many issues. He's assuming...
Sam, for clarification for our viewers and perhaps for Manu, that second book that Luke wrote, you're referring to the book of Acts, chapter 1, for our viewers who would like to go there to confirm what Brother Sam said.
Yeah, the skeptical scholars tell you the same author wrote Acts. They may say it wasn't Luke, but they'll say it's the same author.
Right.
So that same author tells us in Acts 1, Jesus remained on earth for 40 days. So obviously he's summarizing his report in Luke 24. So that in itself tells you, you cannot necessarily assume that Luke 24 refers